Dingoes are our most misunderstood native animal, often in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. But they're also endangered, and one woman has made it her life mission to save them from extinction. She's cared for hundreds, including one miracle pup.
In a sun-scorched corner of the Australian Outback, decades of ecological collapse turned once living land into a struggling wasteland. Native plants faded, small marsupials vanished, and invasive predators took over. But instead of using more fences or poison, conservationists tried something unexpected, releasing 50 wild dingoes.
A pack of dingoes is hunting and eating pets in Darwin. At least 3 domestic dogs have been killed in one suburb and more animals are missing. Local residents are worried a child will be next, as James Glenday reports.
Long seen as a threat, these predators triggered a dramatic chain reaction. Grass returned, native animals recovered, and the landscape began to heal. Could one species really reset an entire wilderness? The ecological crisis. The Australian Outback, a place once bursting with unique life, had slipped quietly into ecological collapse. Native grasses that once carpeted the red earth had vanished, replaced by dusty craters and barren patches stretching as far as the eye could see. The small marsupials that once thrived here, creatures like the bilby and the quoll, had all but disappeared. In their absence, invasive predators such as red foxes and feral cats took over, dominating the landscape and preying on what little native wildlife remained. This unchecked invasion transformed vast stretches of what had been vibrant wilderness into something resembling a lunar wasteland. The red dirt, typically teeming with signs of life, became an empty stage where the drama of extinction quietly played out. For decades, the delicate balance that had sustained these ecosystems was unraveling beneath the harsh sun and endless blue sky. The natural gardeners of the land had disappeared, and with them, the intricate web of survival began to collapse. Farmers and conservationists alike watched helplessly as the land deteriorated. Efforts like fencing and poisons failed to stop the damage, while native species populations plummeted. What had once been a complex, interdependent ecosystem was now a broken system vulnerable to drought, erosion, and further decline. Something had to change, but the solution seemed as elusive as the disappearing wildlife. As the ecosystem faltered, questions loomed over how to rebuild what was lost. Could the land heal without its key native players? Would human intervention be enough to reverse decades of damage? These uncertainties hung heavy over the red plains and ghostly scrub, setting the stage for a daring experiment that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew. The problem was clear, but complex. Invasive predators were overwhelming the native fauna, and the absence of an apex predator left an unbearable gap. As experts weighed their options, a bold idea emerged, one that seemed counterintuitive to many, but promised to restore balance where previous attempts had failed. The intensity of the crisis tore at the confidence of researchers and locals alike. Could reintroducing a predator so long vilified and feared really be the key? The stakes were high, not just for the Outback, but for conservation worldwide. The shadow of uncertainty stretched across the dusty reserve, begging for a new sheriff. This wilderness was at a tipping point, fragile and exposed. But within this delicate moment, a chance to reset the ecosystem quietly took shape, setting into motion a transformation that would ripple through every layer of the Outback's living tapestry. From this broken landscape rose a challenge: to reimagine the role of nature's balance and confront past mistakes. The journey toward recovery hinged on reestablishing a foundational piece lost for generations. It wouldn't just be about returning animals to the wild. It would be about restoring an ancient system of checks and balances that once thrived here. And that meant confronting the fate of the apex predator itself. The role of the dingo as nature's unlikely hero soon became the focus of a bold new chapter in this unfolding story. The forgotten apex predator. For more than 100 years, dingoes seemed to carry this heavy weight in Australia's ecological history. They were introduced thousands of years ago, and for a long time people treated them as a native kind of animal. But once European settlers arrived, they quickly got turned into the public enemy number one. Sheep and cattle farms spread fast. and the dingo was framed as this frightening risk to livestock and, well, everyday livelihoods. So then an aggressive eradication push rolled across the continent, pretty much everywhere. And yes, there were thousands of miles of fencing raised, like really explicitly meant to keep dingoes out, which ended up breaking up their habitat and pushing them toward the brink in many places. Still, that concentrated hostility toward one of nature's top predators kinda dismissed a key reality. The dingo actually helped keep ecosystems healthy. When they were removed, there was this vacuum at the very top, this missing presence, and it wasn't harmless. It came with a steep price, sooner than anyone hoped. If there aren't any dingoes to kind of patrol the food chain, then invasive species, like red foxes and feral cats, start moving ahead in a big way and fast. These smaller predators end up chewing through native wildlife, and a lot of those animals had evolved with very few defenses against hunters that just keep showing up. As a result, many mammal species took hard hits. Some fell into sharp decline, and others went extinct outright. And the whole place felt different. Habitats changed because these invasive predators were suddenly everywhere and staying. Soon, the domino effect looked obvious. With no apex predator around to keep populations in check, all those carefully tuned relationships in the ecosystem started unraveling. Kangaroos then ballooned out of control, grazing too heavy, mowing down grasses, and making the soil more exposed. From there, it was like the land went into a kind of downward spiral, losing diversity and resilience at the same time, and the drought risk creeping higher too. Scientists and conservationists eventually started to see it clearly that removing dingoes may have unleashed even worse ecological damage than their presence ever could have caused. The earlier eradication plan didn't work. It basically revealed a blunt need to rethink the role of this misunderstood predator, not just as an enemy, but as part of Australia's wild spaces. Yet, decades of demonization did make the idea of reintegrating dingoes feel kinda contentious, like a difficult topic people kept avoiding. Many worried about the risks of releasing predators, long thought to be a threat to livestock and to local communities as well. Could dingoes really come back as protectors of the natural order, or would they just make things more brittle than they already were? The image of the dingo sort of stayed stuck between folklore and fear, a symbol that was alternately respected and then later condemned across the continent. That contradiction shaped the public mood and the policy response. It also muddled efforts to figure out their real ecological importance without all the noise. Still, despite all the arguing, new research started to show something different, a newer angle where dingoes weren't simply villains, but rather important stewards of the environment, capable of restoring a kind of order through their everyday natural behaviors. They aren't only wild dogs in the simple sense. They're apex predators with intricate social organization, and that organization ripples through the whole landscape. This shifting understanding set the scene for a daring kind of experiment. Could the return of the dingo reverse decades of damage and help bring the outback back to life? To test that, scientists and land managers moved forward with a bold step, one that would push against the old perceptions and basically reframe conservation in Australia. The decision to reintroduce dingoes would soon test whether a small but determined population could tip the scales toward recovery. Reintroducing dingoes. In a groundbreaking effort, conservationists embarked on a mission to reintroduce dingoes to a vast reserve in New South Wales. 50 dingoes were carefully selected and transported back into the wild, marking one of the most deliberate ecological restorations ever undertaken in Australia. This was not a haphazard release, but a well-planned project that considered genetic diversity, habitat needs, and long-term sustainability. The selection process focused on choosing individuals from different regions to ensure a healthy gene pool capable of adapting and thriving. Each dingo was fitted with a GPS collar, providing researchers with real-time data to track movements, behaviors, and territory establishment. This technological edge enabled close monitoring while minimizing disturbance to the animal's natural routines. Despite the meticulous preparation, the project faced skepticism and concern. Many feared the dingoes would wreak havoc on livestock and remaining wildlife, reinforcing old prejudices. Others doubted that 50 individuals could make a meaningful difference in a million-acre landscape dominated by invasive species and ecological damage. Scientists knew dingoes were not just wild dogs, but apex predators with sophisticated social dynamics and territorial instincts. This complexity both inspired hope and posed uncertainty about how these animals would interact with the existing ecosystem and human neighbors. Once released, the dingoes quickly established family packs and claimed territories, signaling a return of an ancient social order to the reserve. Their territorial nature meant that competition with invasive species was inevitable, setting into motion a biological contest that would prove transformative for the habitat. Initial signs of change were subtle but promising. Shortly after release, fox sightings within the core areas of the reserve began to decline sharply. These smaller predators, once dominant, seemed to retreat in the face of dingo presence, forced to the peripheries and thick brush, where they could avoid direct conflict. The project's early phase was critical, laying the foundation for ecological shifts that would ripple through the food web. It was a test of whether a relatively small number of apex predators could influence a vast, complex landscape weakened by years of imbalance. The courage and vision behind this reintroduction challenged assumptions about predator management and conservation. It was a bold gamble on nature's resilience, and the results would soon speak volumes about the power of restoring original predators to their rightful place. The ripples from this small pack of wild dogs would go on to completely transform the Outback's ecology and rewrite the future of conservation. Impact on invasive species. The arrival of the 50 dingoes kinda marked the beginning of a big dramatic shift in the reserve predator hierarchy. Not the slow sort either. Dingoes aren't just hunters, they are really territorial apex predators, and they fiercely defend their ranges. Within months, the fox population in the core release areas didn't just decline, it plummeted. And it's not only that, their presence somehow disrupted the invasive predator's dominance, so the foxes and the feral cats had to back off into the thickest, most hard-to-reach brush along the edges of the reserve. That behavior change created what ecologists call a fear landscape, basically a place where smaller predators are kept down, not necessarily because they die, but because the danger is right there, the risk of a direct confrontation. The foxes stopped daring to roam the open plains, where their hunting was most effective. Instead, they confined themselves to marginal habitat, where prey is thinner, scarcer in practice, and that means large sections of land got a real reprieve from their predation. The effects of this fear ripple out in a sort of surprising ways. With feral cats and foxes sort of pressured into hiding, vulnerable native animals found new windows of safety. Nocturnal birds and reptiles, which had been heavily preyed upon, began to change their movement and started to reclaim the dark. The dingoes' influence also reshaped the very rhythm of life in the reserve, easing invasive species just enough so the long-suppressed natives could kind of breathe again. But this dynamic wasn't a plain predator-prey deal. It was more like an ecological recalibration, tangled and more nuanced. Instead of wiping out the invasive species, dingoes pressured them behaviorally, so the balance shifted, without completely eliminating anyone. That meant natives that are fragile with direct predation got a chance to recover, while the invasive numbers stayed under control. Local farmers, too, at first they were skeptical. They had worried dingoes would threaten livestock. Yet what happened was different. The dingoes focused their hunting on wild pigs and goats, two invasive species that are notorious for tearing up crops and damaging infrastructure. By controlling those big pest populations, dingoes indirectly helped agricultural interests and slowly turned some of the critics into supporters. The whole reintroduction did show, kind of, how apex predators can indirectly steer ecosystems, mostly by nudging the behavior of mesopredators. Once those foxes and feral cats were suppressed, it translated into less pressure on smaller mammals and even ground-dwelling birds. So you got this kind of comeback that really would have been impossible before, or at least not in the same way. In the end, it makes clear that predator relationships can ripple across several levels of biodiversity. A few technological tools like GPS collars on dingoes, plus thermal drones that monitored fox movement, also verified the change. The research teams could map dingo territories next to the invasive predator hotspots that were shrinking. That gave something more tangible, because it wasn't just observation. Basically, the data suggested that wherever dingoes were roaming freely, the invasive fox numbers fell, which backed up the idea that these top predators act like ecological regulators. Ecologists started describing this process as one of the most successful instances of biological control in recent history. It wasn't merely about adding a predator back into the landscape, more like repairing a key connection in the ecosystem's usual system of checks and balances. The dingoes weren't only hunters, they were also ecological engineers, changing how habitats get used and how animals move around. That new balance then became the base for native wildlife returning. With invasive predators reduced, native species had an opening they hadn't really seen before. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter of the ecosystem's revival. The return of native species was more than just a hopeful sign. It was a vital turning point toward ecological restoration. Revival of native wildlife. With the foxes and feral cats pushed to the fringes, the native wildlife that had long teetered on the edge of extinction began to reappear. Small ground-dwelling marsupials like bilbies and quolls, once thought lost, started emerging again in increased numbers. These animals are more than just survivors. They are crucial agents in the outback's ecological health, known as the gardeners of the desert. These marsupials dig holes in the sand searching for insects and tubers, creating natural traps that hold moisture, seeds, and nutrients. Their digging activity helps promote plant growth by aerating the soil and allowing seeds to germinate. As these gardeners returned, dusty wastelands began to sprout small shrubs, slowly replacing barren craters with green patches. The resurgence of native mammals also affected other species. Larger herbivores like kangaroos and emus adapted to the renewed landscape, but in healthier ways. Contrary to what some might assume, the presence of dingoes did not reduce kangaroo populations by simple predation. Instead, dingoes created a landscape of fear that kept herbivores moving, preventing overgrazing, which had previously decimated grasslands. This shift in herbivore behavior allowed native grasses to recover and spread. Within 2 years, what was once barren desert began to resemble a vibrant meadow, with grasses reaching full maturity and dropping seeds that ensured continuing regeneration. The dingoes, through their influence on herbivores, acted as natural rangers, managing the balance of the grazing herds better than any human intervention. Birdlife also experienced a notable comeback. The return of native vegetation led to a surge in insect populations, drawing back insectivorous birds like honey-eaters, parrots, and rare desert finches. Predatory birds such as wedge-tailed eagles increased in numbers, scavenging leftovers from dingoes. This secondary food web expansion enriched the entire ecosystem, creating a symphony of renewed biodiversity. Indigenous species once silent in the night now contributed to a dynamic ecosystem. Native reptiles found refuge, and ground-nesting birds laid eggs with less threat from invasive predators. The recovered plant life provided shelter and food, supporting complex interactions that had long been missing. The once fading landscape was now filled with signs of life, from the soil to the treetops. The coupling of predator-prey balance with habitat renewal exemplified how interconnected nature truly is. The domino effect started by the dingoes not only revitalized animals, but also restored essential ecosystem functions. This revival marked a hopeful turning point, a living demonstration that ecosystems can heal if given a chance. From the smallest bilby to the soaring wedge-tailed eagle, native species reclaimed their roles in a landscape healing from decades of imbalance. The profound return of wildlife underscored the critical importance of apex predators in ecosystem health and foretold a future where nature managed itself once again, a future deeply rooted in balance and respect for ancient ecological relationships. Changes in vegetation and soil. The return of the dingoes didn't just poke at animal numbers, it also kicked off this pretty dramatic change in the ground itself. Once kangaroos and other plant eaters were moving around more or less continuously across the area, their grazing ended up being spread out much more, instead of getting stuck concentrated in just one spot. That little behavioral shuffle, sort of, made it easier for native grasses and shrubs to come back, and they could take root right where there had been only bare, dusty soil. The overgrown clumps of dry weeds, which were always ready for fires, started to get replaced by vegetation that was healthier and able to hold on to moisture better. Then, as grasses and shrubs kept re-establishing themselves, the soil that had been, for a long time, vulnerable to erosion from those harsh outback winds began to settle down and stabilize. The new root systems helped anchor everything, so the earth lost less topsoil during storms or even during droughts. This whole rebuilding of the land's integrity, in turn, helped keep nutrients and moisture from washing away or drying out too fast, so there was a steadier base for even more plant growth. When those rare desert rains finally arrived, the difference was kind of obvious. Instead of racing off in muddy flash floods, the water got soaked up and sifted into the ground, thanks to the protective plant cover and root networks. Old creek beds that had been dry for months started holding water for longer stretches. That, in turn, replenished the habitats that relied on seasonal runoff. Basically, the dingoes had put the reserve's natural plumbing back in order. This kind of biological recovery felt like a clean example of nature's resilience, driven by a restored predator-prey balance and all those ecosystem jobs that need doing. The dingoes' effects kept spreading outward, so the place moved from damaged and worn down to something vibrant and self-sustaining. Soil chemistry shifted too, leaning toward greater carbon storage. In other words, it helped undo the direction that had been making the land act like a carbon source, and it pushed it toward becoming a carbon sink. That change might sound subtle, but it was still a strong help for fighting climate change. Ecologists were, honestly, surprised at how one species' reintroduction could kick off a broader ecological renewal, a renewal that brought living things back into the soil, the grass, and the water, all tangled together in that complex relationship. The outcome wasn't just about species numbers going up or down. It showed very clearly how connected landscape health really is. It was like a reminder: restoring one keystone species can reset entire ecosystems, even when things look far too broken to come back. When soil and vegetation started to come back, the fire risk across the reserve kinda eased too. Rather than those patchy, dry fuels just lying in wait for ignition, the more uniform grazing kept up by dingoes seemed to stop any nasty accumulation. In the end, native grasses stayed greener and held more moisture for longer than the invasive weeds they had replaced, which gave a kind of natural barrier against the scale and severity of bushfires. The outback, once it looked like it might unravel, began to show renewal signals both above ground and below. This shift offered a hopeful precedent for restoration efforts across the world, suggesting that predator-driven ecological steadiness can heal more than animal populations. It can also repair the whole land itself. With the physical landscape healing, another equally fascinating transformation was unfolding within the social world of the dingoes themselves. Social behavior of dingoes. Dingoes are not solitary wanderers. Their survival depends on complex social structures formed within family packs. As the 50 dingoes settled into the reserve, researchers observed how these packs quickly established themselves as the social fabric of the area. Clear territorial boundaries emerged, fiercely defended through vocal howls that echoed across the plains, marking ownership and deterring rivals. These howls did more than stake out territory. They reshaped animal behavior beyond the dingo packs themselves. Other species in the reserve picked up on the dingo's presence and adjusted their activity accordingly. Feral cats, notoriously difficult to manage, shifted their hunting times to avoid encounters, creating temporal refuges for nocturnal birds and reptiles that had long been vulnerable to predation. This social dominance created a new daily rhythm across the reserve, what some researchers call a recalibration of the day-night cycle. Predator-prey interactions, hunting schedules, and animal movements all began to align with the tempo set by the dingoes. Their vocal broadcasts served as both warnings and orchestrations of life's balance in the outback. Within their packs, dingoes exhibited highly coordinated hunting and territorial defense, maintaining wave-like control across the landscape. This cooperation amplified their impact on regulating herbivore and invasive predator populations, heightening the ecosystem's overall stability. Their social complexity allowed them to occupy this keystone role with remarkable efficiency. Interestingly, the packs also focused their attention on controlling invasive species such as wild pigs and goats, which are major nuisances to local farmers. Rather than venturing out to threaten livestock, the dingoes spent much of their energy managing these large pests within the reserve. This unexpected benefit helped ease tensions with neighboring agricultural communities and shifted local perspectives about the dingo's role. The reintroduction program leveraged technology to monitor this social behavior closely. Equipped with GPS collars, researchers tracked pack territories, movements, and interactions, watching how social bonds influenced hunting patterns and territorial expansions. This data deepened understanding of how social predator dynamics can cascade through ecosystems. Life inside these dingo packs offered insight into evolutionary success. Their social system, tight family units cooperating seamlessly, provided stability in a harsh environment. This social cohesion allowed dingoes to adapt to the outback's extreme conditions, securing their place as long-standing custodians of the land. As the dingoes reclaimed their ancestral role, the broader conservation community began to see the possibilities for restoring similar balances elsewhere, raising hopes for an expanding movement of ecological renewal worldwide. Broader implications and lessons. The success of releasing 50 dingoes into the New South Wales Reserve has rippled way beyond the boundaries of that once failing ecosystem. The whole effort has kind of restarted global conversations about rewilding, bringing apex predators back to landscapes where they've been removed. And it also shows how nature's own mechanisms can be used to mend environments that got damaged. Several countries that are dealing with invasive species and ecosystem collapse are now looking at this case like it is a kind of blueprint for ecological recovery, or at least a strong start. One real takeaway from the Dingo Project is the keystone species idea, meaning a few animals that effectively keep entire ecosystems linked together. When apex predators get taken out, the tangled food webs get thrown off, and then you see weird knock-on effects, such as overgrazing, invasive species popping up more than expected, and habitat decline. The careful reintroduction of dingoes suggests restoring balance isn't some kind of constant command system. It's more about trusting the natural processes that have worked for ages through evolution. Also, the project pushes back against modern conservation's habit of micromanaging nature. A lot of times, humans try to dictate exact numbers for populations, and then intervene constantly to patch problems. But the dingoes kinda demonstrated that nature can self-regulate when it's given room to function in a more authentic way. The whole predator-prey cycle, once interrupted, was restored, and that helped instincts, movement, and survival tactics do their job again to help the ecosystem keep steady. And there is this cultural thread, too. Indigenous rangers have shared stories that go way back, describing the dingo as a guardian of balance, a kind of wisdom that's now supported by scientific data from GPS tracking and soil studies. That blend of old knowledge and newer tools ends up feeling like a meaningful partnership, one that guides conservation with a more holistic aim and with real respect for land custodianship. Climate change adds urgency and also this extra layer of mess to restoration work worldwide. The shift where the reserve used to act like a carbon source, then it turns into a carbon sink. Because vegetation returns and soil health improves, it really shows how managing wildlife connects to bigger global problems. Dingoes, because of what they do in the ecosystem, have turned into kind of an accidental ally for climate mitigation. And it makes clear that biodiversity and the air we breathe are not separate things. But even with these wins, stuff is still hard. The ecosystem is alive in a sense. It keeps changing. And it keeps adjusting to new pressures, from climate extremes to shifts in species numbers. Keeping a healthy dingo population means constant watching and also staying in touch with local communities to juggle conservation aims with agricultural concerns. This project is not some final answer, more like a continual practice of figuring things out and adapting as you go. What's happened here has sparked other rewilding efforts elsewhere too. In North America, people are bringing wolves back, and in Europe, there is lynx restoration, which points to a bigger recognition. Predators are not just wildlife extras. They can be key catalysts for ecosystem resilience. It feels like a conservation approach that's still forming, one that accepts complexity and respects how nature manages itself without our heavy hand. And the dingo work brings up deeper questions. What other missing predators might be hanging out in ecosystems that are under human pressure but don't get noticed? If we restore these apex species in other places, could we see recoveries that look just as astonishing? The chance here asks for boldness and humility at the same time. You have to be ready to step back and give space for those older ecological roles to resume. This incredible journey of 50 dingoes brings hope that even the most damaged ecosystems can heal when nature is allowed to take the lead. Their return restored balance, revived wildlife, and reshaped landscapes in ways humans alone could never achieve. If you found this story inspiring, please like and subscribe for more amazing tales of nature's resilience.